First off, thank everyone for taking time out of their evening to come here and listen. I was not aware that the Super Bowl was occurring this evening until this morning, so I'm just really glad that all of you decided to miss the entire thing and spend 3 hours here with me as we go and we talk about the Bible. Hopefully not. This is one of those lessons where I feel it prudent to say that this is a time where I am preaching to myself. This is a topic that I personally have a hard time practicing, and it's one that is very important, but very difficult for me. And it's such an odd thing, perhaps because of how difficult I find it to practice. This evangelism is something of a passion topic for me. I tend to get very into it while I speak about it, which is part of why I wanted to give this disclaimer here. Anytime I'm saying that we need to do better or that we need to practice this thing more, it's all in reference to me and what I'm doing in my life. And so I just want to clarify that at the beginning here. I'm not trying to attack anyone other than myself, but if it is convicting to you, then perhaps this lesson will be as beneficial to you as it was to me. The reason that we're going to be talking about this tonight has to do with my brother. For those of you who don't know, I do have siblings. I'm the youngest of 4, and I live with a brother who is just older than me, and he's an atheist. He has some very strong opinions, very well thought out arguments as to why he doesn't believe in the Bible and Christianity. He happens to be a philosophy major, so he's been trained in that realm of things. And perhaps contradictory to it, he is actually very passionate about religious studies. He finds the topic very interesting. For him, it's more about the social and cultural impact that these things have. But the bottom line is that for me, this means I have a lot of work cut out for me. I have a lot of studying and arguments to make. And this is where I am hoping to start. This is the point of the lesson tonight, is just to get to a starting place. That's where I'm hoping we'll get to go. I have 3 points for us this evening, if you can even call them points. Really, they're more of tips that I have been thinking about as I begin this journey of teaching him. And so I think they can be beneficial for us all, and we'll just go ahead and get right into it. Tip number 1 is to focus on the soul, not the person. We often stress this point, rightly so, when talking about potential prospects. When we talk about people who we want to study with, or who perhaps we think, judging by their lifestyle, wouldn't be accepting of what we're trying to teach. And so we'll stress the point to focus on the soul, not the person. Focus on the dire needs that they have of the truth. But I would submit to you that this goes beyond just who we're talking to. This goes beyond just who we think we should be talking to. I think keeping this mindset even throughout our lives, throughout as we are trying to talk to these people the whole time, I think it can be beneficial for us. I think it can help us to deal with the setbacks, the backlash that we get from trying to teach people who don't believe what we do, who don't believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God. So the first thing I would encourage us is to see people as immortal beings. Our proof text for this is Matthew 10:28, as well as 2 Corinthians 4:18. I'm not going to read them because in all of my practices, I ended up going over time. So we're going to try to cut it down a little bit. But these are our proof texts. Matthew 10:28 is talking about how God is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. It makes a distinction between the body and the soul. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 18, which we read in Bible class this morning, is talking about how that which is seen, the physical, is temporary, and that which is not seen, the spiritual, is eternal. So these are our proof texts for this. I'm going to read a quote here by C.S. Lewis. It's one of my favorite quotes of his. He said, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors." To see people as immortals is to see them past their human failings. It is to see past their lifestyle, and it is to see the soul that lies beneath. It is to see the immortal in the alcoholic, just to see the immortal in that guy who just won't learn from his mistakes, no matter how many times you try and help him. To see the immortal in that guy who was driving under the speed limit in the fast lane on your way over here. To see past their failings. When Jesus met his disciples, he didn't do as his culture would have dictated he do. When he saw Matthew in the tax collector's office, he didn't snub him. He didn't say, "Oh, look at this dirty tax collector. This guy isn't worthy to walk with me." He said, "Follow me. Come with me." Because he understood the potential that Peter had to be a force of good. Seeing people as immortal souls is about gaining perspective. It's about broadening our perspective, as we were talking about this morning in Joseph's lesson. It's about incorporating the physical and the spiritual together as one. It is about seeing the soul. It also implies looking ahead to their eternal consequences. In John chapter 12 and verse 48, Jesus says that it is his word that will judge us in the last day. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, he says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of my Father." In Revelation chapter 21 and verse 8, it shows us what happens to those who aren't doing the will of the Father, who aren't walking in the ways of the light, as we so often say. It says that there is a condemnation for them, the condemnation of the lake of fire, that is the second death. There are consequences to how we live this life, and those consequences are either arrest at the end of it all, or it's eternal pain. That's what C.S. Lewis was getting at when he said immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. The state of the soul determines the state in their afterlife. This is important to us as we are talking and as we are evangelizing, because it helps us retain the gravity of the situation. It helps us to keep our minds on just how much they need the truth. And it is through that knowledge, that understanding, that allows us to be patient with them. It allows us to understand when they lash out because they don't believe what we do. It helps us to persevere in those times where we're really hurt because they just aren't getting it. When they're making light of what we take so seriously. I remember there was this time, a long time ago now, where I was talking with Douglas. We were doing something called the Open Bible Study. It's like a little yes or no questionnaire, and it goes through starting at a point where people aren't as familiar with the Bible, who don't have that foundation, that background. And it was going through some evidences. Specifically at this time, I remember we were going through scientific foreknowledge in the Bible. We were looking at Psalm 8 and how it defines the paths of the sea, and how that was evidence that God created the earth and that the Bible was accurate, because back in the day, the way we discovered the paths of the sea was by using the Bible, seeing that passage, and then using it as a foundation to go look for those paths, and we found them. And I remember he said to me that they knew a lot more than we thought they did at that time, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that they knew that, and that's probably true, maybe an accurate argument to make, I don't know. And so he drew an Ouroboros, which is a snake eating its own tail, which is something he did a lot in that study to signify that answer was inconclusive. Like I said, he did that multiple times throughout. And it was really hurtful for me, because that was something that for me was so simple, so easy to understand, something that I was taking so seriously and wanted him so seriously to grasp. And it felt like to me that he was making light of it, that he was not treating it necessarily as a joke, but he just wasn't taking it as seriously as I was. What I would say is that we can't give up every single time that we get hurt when we're trying to evangelize, when we get hurt, when people don't take us seriously. If that was how God approached the situation, none of us would even be here. If God decided to withdraw every single time that someone decided to reject him or to make light of his word, we wouldn't be here. He would have destroyed us a long time ago. I mean, look at Noah. He was by no means a perfect man. We all know that. Everyone sins. And I'm sure there were times where he hurt God. And yet, he was the only one that made it out of the flood, along with his family. But that wouldn't have happened if God was not patient with us, if he wasn't understanding with us, because he recognized the need of our souls. So when we say to focus on the soul and not the person, what we're talking about is this broadening of perspective. It is looking past the people, looking past the pain that they can cause us, to persevere because of what their soul needs. And this brings me to the second tip, which is to focus on the person and not on the soul. Before any of you make any sort of comments on the contradiction, Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5, look it up. Focusing on the person and not on the soul is about taking that broad view that we have worked on establishing, and it's about narrowing it down to the individual. In 1 Corinthians chapter 19, verse 20, 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 22, we are going to go ahead and read this one. And if you saw on the bulletin, this was our text. Paul wrote, "For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some." You cannot become as weak to the weak if you don't know anything about the weak. You can't become as a Jew to the Jews if you know nothing about the Jews. If we want to establish a relationship with people, and if we want to establish a good line of communication with them, we have to learn more about them. A good place to start is their background. Where did they grow up? Where are they from? Their education. How educated are they? And as Mike would say, learn about their passions. I don't know how often Mike actually asks this question, but I do recall the first time I ever visited here and the first time that we sat down for lunch together, he asked me, "What's your passion? What are you interested in? What are you passionate about?" Learning these things is how we establish a form of communication. There's a book by John Milton Gregory. It's called The 7 Laws of Teaching. If you aren't familiar with it, I would suggest you do get familiar. It's a fantastic book. These 7 laws are incredibly simple, but incredibly profound when it comes to learning how to teach people. I want to mention 3 of them. This is the law of the learner, the law of the language, and the law of the lesson. The law of the learner states that a learner is one who attends with interest to the lesson, and that with interest part is really important. The law of the language states that the language used as a medium between teacher and learner must be common to both. And the law of the lesson says that the lesson to be mastered must be explicable in the terms of truth already known by the learner. In other words, the unknown must be explained by means of the known. So what does this look like effectively, right? People are naturally more interested in talking about something that they already have an interest in. I have a buddy who really likes cars. He can go on and on about how an engine works, how brakes work, all of that stuff that I know nothing about. But he can talk about that for hours, and I will have no understanding. But when it comes to other things, perhaps he's not as interested in that. Perhaps he can't talk for hours about, I don't know, proper etiquette and manners. But the point is if we take the time to gain at least a general knowledge, like I'm not saying we have to become experts in these things. We don't have to spend 4 years going to college to learn all about cars so you can have a conversation with them. But if we take the time to get at least a general knowledge, we can engage and we can accrue interest, not like financially, but you know what I mean, in our conversation and in our relationship. Secondly, is that learning about their interests gives it the benefit of a common language. One thing that we use a lot in church circles, we use words like salvation, redemption, propitiation. These are not words that are commonly used out in the secular world. We all have an understanding of them, even if it's only surface or context level. We all know what they mean, but if you walk over to like the nearest Whataburger and start talking about propitiation, probably going to get a lot of confused looks, probably because you're also talking to random people at a Whataburger. But different communities of different interests and ways of life have different vocabularies. And sometimes, even when those words cross over, they mean different things. So we have to become familiar with the interests. We have to become familiar with the vernacular of those particular interests in order to effectively reach people. Using the knowledge we gain about people's interests enables us to use that which is already familiar to them to explain something that is unfamiliar. To use myself as an example, I really like superheroes. That's my niche. That's my interest there. And I really like The Flash. That's one of my favorite all time. One of my favorite moments in Flash comics comes from a younger version of The Flash, younger Barry Allen. And he and his mom are broken down on the side of the highway. And his mom's working on the car, trying to get it running again. And he's sitting there, and he's saying, no one's stopping to help us. Like, why aren't they stopping to help? And his mom's going, and she's saying that, they got places to be, they're busy, and I'm the only one who can get this working anyway. And he says, I would stop and help. And she says, I know. And if you start reading through the Flash comics, you see that he is the type of person, the type of character that would stop and help every single time. Also, if you're not familiar with the Flash, he basically just runs fast, but it's really cool. But there's another man. And this guy was real, and he existed about 2,000 years ago. His name was Jesus. And he was the type of guy who would stop and help. There was this one time where this ruler of the synagogue there, his name was Jairus, he came to Jesus, and he told him his daughter was sick, and he asked Jesus to help him, because Jesus could heal people. And on the way to heal this man's daughter, Jesus is kind of getting mobbed by a crowd because he's a really popular guy. And he's walking, and there's this woman in the crowd, and she's got this really bad infirmity. She's got a flow of blood, and it's not stopping. And she knows that Jesus can heal people, and she knows that if she can just touch the hem of his garment, she'll be healed. So she forces her way through the crowd. She gets that hem of the garment, she touches it, immediately healed. And Jesus realizes this. He stops and he says, who touched me? And his disciples are there and they're like, Jesus, we're getting mocked by a crowd. What do you mean who touched you? Everyone did. And he said, no, someone touched me. Who was it? And this lady comes forward and she says, it was me. And he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Even on his way to help this man's daughter, Jesus stops and he helps this woman. That's the type of character that Jesus is. The type of man he was. Now, this is just using me as an example, right? This is my interest, something that is familiar to me. And already, I think I can say that I've used something familiar to you to teach you something unfamiliar. When we take the time to learn about people, and we learn about what they're passionate about and what they're interested in, and we familiarize ourselves with that language, that's how we get to teach. Because that language has to be common between the two of us. I mean, I can stand up here and say words like, the pseudepigrapha, that's really bad. The Apocrypha, don't like it. But if you don't know what the pseudepigrapha is, if you don't know what the Apocrypha is, you have no idea what I'm talking about. It does nothing for you. The language has to be common in order to teach. If we want to connect with people in a way that enables us to communicate with them, we have to spend time learning about them. It means listening to them. That means studying what they like, which, again, it's not something necessarily easy, right? It means we have to spend our time on them, spend our time familiarizing ourselves with what they like. Our third and our final tip: study, study, study. And hopefully sound doesn't mess up. A means of communication is useless without anything to communicate. This is where this last point comes into play. Acquiring the knowledge, the thing to be communicated, has to be done the entire time that we're talking with people, even before we start talking with people. And what I mean by the knowledge here is what we're trying to teach them. When it comes specifically to atheists, right, we're trying to get them to a point where they understand that there is a God, there is this force that goes beyond our world. From there, teaching them that the Bible, Christianity, is the only way forward, that the God of the Bible is the only God. And then we get to teach them Bible. Then we get to delve into the scriptures and teach them that. This has to be done the entire time. It can't be something that we wait to do until we've established a relationship, until we've established that line of communication. It has to be done the entire time, because when that time comes, we need to be ready. Specifically, along these lines, I just want to give some resources. This is the part of the lesson where I unfortunately can't really delve deeper yet, because I don't know deeper yet. So all I can do is give you some basic information, some resources to help you get your feet wet as I seek to do the same. And so what we're going to talk about first is apologetics. This is a word that we use fairly frequently. I don't know if everyone is familiar with it, but basically it is a means of defending Christian faith. Specifically, it deals with argumentative logic, right, and forming propositions that are sound. I believe it was 2, maybe 3 weeks ago that Jason Roberts was here teaching about logic, talking about syllogisms and how each of the points logically flow together to form your argument and have a sound conclusion. Apologetics is this field that delves a lot into that. What I want to talk about along these lines is 3 arguments for the existence of a God that I have learned from it. These are pretty common arguments. I'm sure most of us have heard them already, but we'll go ahead and go through them anyway. These are the ontological arguments, the teleological argument, and the cosmological argument, which are really fancy words for very basic things. The ontological argument is actually probably the least basic of them, which is a terrible place to start right after I've said that they're basic. This is one that I have trouble wrapping my head around, but if you can do it, then all the power to you. Use whatever works. The ontological argument is a philosophical argument. It states that we can derive the existence of that than which no greater can be conceived, which is a fancy way of saying God, from the concept of God, the concept of that than which no greater can be conceived. Basically, we can imagine a perfect being that nothing and no one is greater than, therefore that being exists. It's not my favorite argument. I have a hard time understanding it exactly, but if you're in philosophical circles, perhaps it would get you some ground covered. The teleological argument is an argument based on design. It looks out into the world and all the complex systems that we have, such as even our bodies. I don't know if you've ever done any study of anatomy. I personally haven't, but I am aware of the fact, because I've looked at apologetics, that our bodies are incredibly complex. they are incredibly complex machines, basically. And it's just really hard to see how this universe could not have been designed when you take a look at all of those complex systems. And that's what the teleological argument seeks to propagate. It says that the universe must have been designed, and design requires a designer, and that designer would be God. The cosmological argument says that the universe as a whole is an effect or a contingent of a greater and antecedent or precedent cause, which would be God. That God caused the universe, and the universe is the effect of that cause. All of these arguments are really good, but they do require background knowledge to be able to use. Especially like the teleological argument is one heavily based on design, but it's designed through nature. So you have to be able to point to the design. You have to be able to show them where that design happens. I think the cosmological argument is kind of the same way, which is you have to prove that there is something in the world that predated its origin, something in the world that is eternal. I think there are arguments to do it. I personally don't think I have a strong enough one to share here, but the arguments exist, and I would heavily encourage to go look at them. Apologeticspress.org is a great website to use for this. There are tons and tons of articles, tons of research that was done to support these arguments, the apologetics of Christians. So I'd highly recommend going there as well. Secondly, I would say the Bible, specifically the background of the Bible. Not necessarily dealing with scriptures themselves yet, but this is talking about, say, the inspiration of the Bible, how it is the actual Word of God, talking about how we got the books of the Bible that we use today, how it was copied throughout the centuries, how it was, blanking. And the manuscripts that we use to translate our English translations in other languages as well. There's a book that covers all of that. It's called General Introduction to the Bible by Geisler and Nix. It's a really good book. I went through it when I was in school. I would highly recommend that as well. The Bible can also be used as a historical or archaeological guide. That's a big word. It goes into things like the scientific foreknowledge found within, such as the paths of the sea from Psalm 8. You can also use it to look at archaeology and see that it is an actual historically accurate account of those things. There was a big discovery a while back of the Hivite civilization. And this was a really big point of contention, which is that the Bible talks about the Hivites in the historical narrative books. It talks about the Hivites and how big a threat they were, how big a civilization they were. And for a lot of years, we were finding no evidence of that around the area that they were supposed to be in. Cut to, however long ago, we found the Hivites. We found them pretty much exactly in the place the Bible said they would be. We found all of the archaeological evidence that they existed, which was a very big turning point when it came to using the Bible for archaeology. So that is another thing you can go into as well. The main thing I would say with these is that you have to be prepared to show your work. You have to be prepared to show sources, show where you learned your information from, because a lot of people may have sort of an inherent bias against the Bible based on what they've been taught, what they've heard growing up. There is a lot of background research that we have to do and have to be able to show as well. The point of these two things is to get them to a point where from atheism to agnosticism, get them to a point where they don't believe in God, to say that there is in fact a God, even if you haven't yet pointed to which one that is. Then You can make your case. You can make your case for Christianity. You can make your case for God. And after they get to that point, after they get to the point where you're telling them that the Bible is true and you have shown them sufficient evidence, then you can start teaching them Scripture. That's, in my mind, how you teach an atheist. Take them to a point where they know that there's a God, and then you take them to the point where the Bible is sufficient enough to prove that the Christian God is God. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, the Great Commission, something we're all familiar with. Jesus says, go into all the world, making disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded to you. All of that background study that we have to do is leading to this, is leading to making disciples, leading to making people who can also go out and teach. That's what we're trying to get to. It's important to note that the order, of course, in which that is stated is really important. Baptizing them and then teaching. Get them to a point where they can be baptized and then teach them as well. The teaching never really stops, basically, is what we're trying to say. It is an ongoing thing. But these are my thoughts when it comes to teaching an atheist. These are my starting ground for how I'm going to go about doing it myself. Perhaps in the future I can give an update, but for right now, this is where I'm starting and where I hope that we can start together. There is a lot that goes into teaching people. It's a really complicated process most of the time. It gets very messy. You get very much in the trenches, as they say. The most important thing is that we try. Our success is not measured in the amount of people we convert. Our success is measured in the amount of times we get up to try. That is our focus. That is why we can't give up. That is why we have to keep going. A great place to start is changing our mindset, focusing on the soul, focusing on the immortality of the men and the women around you. Every single one of us in this room right now, we're immortals, whether we think about it that way or not. And all of us have eternal and everlasting consequences for how we use our time on this earth. That doesn't change when you go out into the world. Every single person out there is an immortal too, and all of them have consequences. We need to dig deep, and we need to learn about our students. If we want to be able to teach them, we have to be able to come to a common understanding, a common language, and we have to be able to teach them using what is familiar. We need to teach them the unfamiliar. None of what we're talking about is easy. I mean, we had a whole lesson this morning about how hard it is to incorporate the physical and the spiritual together, to look at that and have that mindset. It is hard to teach people, especially when they don't want to be taught, especially when they're, again, making light of that which you take seriously, when they're making fun of it, when they're outright just angry with you for trying to teach them. It's hard. But again, our success is measured in how many times we get up to try. If you're like me this evening, and you have a hard time trying, there are a lot of us in this room, I think, who can relate to that. I mean, if I may be so bold as to speak for Mike, I would say he probably has a hard time trying too. I mean, we know that he's one of the most evangelistic people in this room, and even he struggles. Even he has hard times. But we got to keep going, and that's what we're all here for, to support each other, to keep each other going. That's why we pray for each other. That's why we call each other, text each other. That's what it means to be the church. Just to keep each other going, keep each other working. We're going to offer the invitation at this time. If you need prayers, if you need a push from your brothers to keep going, we're here to give it. If you need to study and learn more, we got plenty of people here who can do that. But whatever your need may be this evening, let it be known. Come forward as we stand and as we sing.